Welcome back to our study of the book of Genesis for the spring semester of 2026. We're on lesson 9. Last week we talked about the occurrences prior to the flood. We talked about the sons of God and daughters of men in Genesis chapter 6, which refers to saved marrying unsaved. And we're going to continue now with the life of Noah and how God used Noah to save a lost and dying world, not spiritually but physically to save them. His spirituality, it says these are the generation of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect, and of course remember the word perfect is complete. So he was complete in his relationship with the Lord. Doesn't mean he was perfect as without sin, because nobody is, except for God himself, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, all being one God. And so there's no man that's ever been perfect, meaning without sin, but we can't be perfect or complete in our relationship to the Lord. And Noah was just such a man. It says he was complete in his generations, and Noah walked with God. Two people mentioned in the Bible as having walked with God, and that is Noah and Enoch. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there's not been anybody else who's walked with God. I believe many people walk with God today. We can walk with God today. But as far as the Bible listing, is only those two men. But it does tell us that we are to walk with God. And so we can achieve that relationship with God just as Noah did and Enoch did. We can have that same type of relationship with the Lord, as long as we are complete in our relationship with God. It means we're striving to do all the things that God would have us to do. Some questions concerning Noah's generations, the life that he lived prior to the flood. Prior to the flood, the world was completely different than it is now. I believe in the millennial kingdom that the world is going to revert back to that type of world. Now, I can't prove that 100%, but we do know Isaiah talks about the valleys will rise, the mountains will lower. The world is going to be completely different at that point. And just as prior to the flood, man lived to be 1,000 years old, in the millennial kingdom, man can live to be over 1,000 years old. If he was already 50 years old when the millennial kingdom started, he'll be 1,050 at the time that it ends. And God will still have mankind in a physical body. Now, when I say mankind, I'm talking about us, the church, because we'll have glorified bodies at that time, and our relationship with God will be different than normal or regular human beings who are born in the millennial kingdom, and those who survive the tribulation period will all enter into the millennial kingdom in their physical bodies. And so just as man was in their physical bodies prior to the flood, there'll be a group of mankind in their physical bodies during the millennial kingdom. And as the animals before the flood didn't seem to hurt anybody, we don't have any evidence of that. Man had dominion over the animals. Man will have dominion over the animals in the millennial kingdom. The animals won't hurt anyone. They'll still be used for food in the millennial kingdom, whereas before the flood, animals were not used for food. Man was to be vegetarians up to that point. And then after the flood, then God says that any, whatever he calls clean, can be used for food throughout the rest of the generations. So prior to the flood, life was different. It's believed, and honestly, there's a lot of speculation here, but things were different, and there's no mention of rain until after the flood, and so very likely they didn't have rain before, and it's very likely that the earth had a very mild climate at that point. So again, this is honestly it's speculation, but that's what many people will state and believe. oceans were smaller, and I do believe that's there's scriptural evidence for that, because in the days of Peleg we talked about that the continents were divided, and so we'll talk about it more later on. But in his days there was a great earthquake on the earth, and the continents were divided. So I believe there were land masses above the oceans. And when the earthquake took place, those land masses fell to the bottom of the oceans and made the waters to rise up. And that's what we have today, and that's why we have the world that we live in today. The strata of the earth bears witness to the flood. It also bears witness to the continents being divided. And so I do believe there is definite evidence for the oceans being smaller. No rugged mountains or deep canyons before that, because they were caused by the quick dispersion of the flood. Also the waters from beneath, during the flood, the Bible says the waters from beneath rose up and the waters from above came down, and that caused turmoil in the earth's strata, and therefore developed the mountains and the canyons that we see today, such as the Grand Canyon or whatever canyon that you can think of. The mountains were pushed up during that time, and then the canyons formed as well. So I think there's clear scientific evidence for that, although some so-called scientists would never admit that. But there's definitely biblical evidence for this as well. With the mountains and valleys would come changes in the weather, and we do know that weather patterns change because of the mountains. I grew up in West Virginia, and so we had a lot of snow, and I'm just 150 miles away from where I used to live, and they have very little snow. And one of the reasons is because of the mountains. When the wind blows across the mountains, they swirl up and over, and therefore missing some of the other states. And so there's definitely clear scientific evidence that weather patterns would have changed after the flood. Vegetation would have thrived worldwide prior to the flood. Remember, I do not believe in global warming, and I'm very hesitant to believe in any type of climate change. And I say hesitant because I think man does have some impact upon the world, but not enough to change it completely. We do have cities that are basically all concrete everywhere. There's no vegetation, and so definitely man has made an impact upon the world at this time. And of course, prior to the flood, we didn't have the buildings and streets that we have today, and so life would have been completely different back then. As I said a while ago, no rainfall as far as we can tell. The ground dews would come up and water the vegetation and be enough because God, of course, created that process, and it was enough for the earth to produce vegetation. In Luke chapter 17 it says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all." Now this is a prophecy here of what's going to take place in the tribulation period. And of course, during the tribulation period, Luke 17 is a sermon on the Olivet Discourse. And so talking about the days of the tribulation, but comparing it back to the days of Noah, and this is a variant spelling of the word Noah. There's, I think, 3 different spellings in the Bible, in the King James Version, if I'm not mistaken, for Noah. Variant spelling doesn't mean a mistake, it just means you had different translators translate different passages, and they can choose. Of course, this came from the Greek, and the Old Testament came from the Hebrew. And so you have a variety of spellings of a single word and not be a contradiction, just be the way that man chose to translate them. But we see that during that time that they were more consumed with themselves than they were with God. And of course we see that's one of the reasons for the flood. We'll look at some other reasons here in a second. But pretty much the day we're living in today. Eat and drink and married, and, well, whatever marriage is anymore, it's been changed, not by God, but by what mankind accepts. And just because mankind accepts it doesn't mean it's right. But that's the world we live in today, giving in marriage till the day of no end of the art. So just basically living for themselves, living their own lives, as too many people do, even people in our churches. There's too many people in our churches that live just for themselves and not for the Lord. Preoccupation with physical appetites, again, same verse. Just eating and drinking, whatever it is, to please themselves. Not worried, again, about the Lord. Advances in technology, and not that this is wrong. I'm not saying that Zilla, but also Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer of brass and iron. I'm not saying that technology is wrong in and of itself. However, when man is so consumed about technology, then they're not putting their mind upon the things of God. It happened at Tower of Babel. God told them to disperse lest every evil imagination come upon them, and that's exactly what happened. And that's the world we live in today. Artificial intelligence is a very handy item to have. I use a lot of things in my house with Alexa or what have you. It's very handy to have to turn the lights on and off, to view my cameras with, or to start my cameras, even start my vacuum cleaner. I like technology, and there's nothing wrong with technology, but the problem is that technology is going to get so advanced that it starts teaching us rather than we teaching it. Now, artificial intelligence is not able to think on its own. It only does what is programmed, just like cloning. I remember a big to-do about cloning a while back, where people said that man created a sheep called Dolly, and it was cloned, and everybody thought, okay, out of nothing, man created that, and that was just totally ridiculous. What they did is they took DNA from one animal and put it in the fetus of another animal, and that animal was born, and they said they cloned it, which it didn't. It just said it survived birth, but died not too long after that. And so, but man claims, that he created life, and people believe that. You talk to people about cloning, they think, oh yeah, man has already created life, and the reality of it is, no, he didn't. He actually took away from life to do that. And so, with artificial intelligence is being trained by the programmers to teach us whatever they want to teach us. I'm not a conspiracy theorist where I believe everything's a conspiracy, but I do see that happening. I see that that's the world that we live in today. Just watch commercials on TV. The commercials on TV are constantly teaching us things that we don't want to be taught, but after somebody repeats it 1,000 times, we get to believe in it. And so that's the world we're living in today. And that's what technology is doing, is taking us away from the Lord, not driving us to Him. And technology can be great to be used to serve the Lord. I have the Bible on my phone, and I can pull it up real quick. I can go to my eSword, and I click on 2 Corinthians 1:4, and look at the word comfort, and click on the Greek word parakleo, to call alongside. It's another word that actually is even used for the Holy Spirit to offer us comfort or consolation. How quick is that, and how easy is that? And that's a great tool that we have, as long as we use it for good. But the world doesn't want to use it for good, it uses it for evil. I think the world would have been better off without the internet. It'd been better off without cell phones. It'd been better off without much of the technology we have today. Although that technology has proved helpful in many ways, it's also turning us away from the Lord. So we have to be very, very careful about that. Materialistic attitudes and interests, man, we live in a world today where it's all about materialism, about what we get. You know, I grew up believing that whatever you get, you worked for it, and if you didn't work for it, you didn't get it. That's the way life was. If you wanted to eat, then you worked for a job. You took a job to earn money. I started doing that at a young age. When I was 13 years old, I started working and bought my own meals after that. And I'm not complaining, I'm bragging, if anything, because I saw that, you know, you work, you eat, you don't work, you don't eat. And then what Paul told church at Thessalonica, man doesn't work and doesn't eat. And so that's the way that God intended for us to do it. But now we live in a world where everybody believes that everything belongs to them. And whatever somebody else has, they deserve it as well. And that is not what the Bible teaches. It doesn't mean we don't help each other out. Those who can't do things, we should be able to help them out. But those who can should get a job. But that's not the world we live in today. And it's amazing how many people in our churches lean more towards, I deserve this because I'm me, I'm whatever. And so it's a dangerous world we live in, but that's that materialistic attitude and interest. Likewise also it was in the days of Lot. They eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built it. All about what they can have and what they can consume rather than about the Lord. Uniformitarian philosophies infers long-term trends from observing a short period of time. And basically saying that everything should be even across the board, everything should be, shouldn't change in some ways. But looking at trends and then trying to place them in a very short period of time, kind of complicated. I don't know how much you really care about this point in the lesson, but the philosophies of the world and how they, again, we think we deserve everything. Devotion to pleasure and comfort, and that's, of course, that's what the world believes today, that we all deserve a house at the beach, we all deserve a house in the mountains, we all deserve whatever. And again, it's all about me, and that's why mankind covers themselves up with drugs and alcohol and what have you, trying to find pleasure in this world and seeking after those things. You know, read Ecclesiastes and look what Solomon tried all those things. And at the end, he said, let's hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. So this is the whole purpose of man. And he tried all the guilty pleasures of the world and found out that they were worthless. And that's what we learn in life, but we don't usually learn it until we're about to die. And that's sad. No concern for God in belief or conduct. So many people today are proud to call themselves atheists, and they're not. If you question them deep down, they know there's a God. They just don't want to admit it, because if they admit it, then they have to believe that they're held accountable, and they don't want to be held accountable. And so they say there's no God. Or then there's some, well, Psalm 14:1 says, the fool has said in his heart, there's no God. They have head knowledge. The fool, in their head, they know there's a God, but they tell themselves over and over again, no, there's no God, there's no God. And there's a lot of so-called believers who say they believe in God, but their actions don't show it. They don't have that belief. They don't live the life according to that. They're more concerned, again, with their own pleasures or materialistic achievements that will get them nowhere. There's a highway here in North Carolina, in Winston-Salem. called the John Gold Highway. And over the years, I've asked many, many, many people who John Gold was, and nobody knows. In fact, I've asked many people who's born here, lived here 50, 60 years or more, who John Gold was, and they don't know. Well, I don't even know where's that highway at. And it's Highway 52 here goes to Winston, and nobody remembers who he was. So what's the point of having things named after you when you die if nobody's going to remember you? Just like when they award people, I heard the other day where they pardoned some guy from 1911, I could be wrong on that. He was a boxer, and he was treated unfairly, and he went to jail for a year, and it definitely was wrong what happened to him, but they pardoned him posthumously, meaning that now they're issuing a pardon, so it's not on his record anymore. Why does that matter? It means 115 years ago, if that date is correct, but well over 100 years ago. Most people don't even know who he was, and he doesn't care about whether if he was a believer, he's in heaven. It's just ridiculous what we tend to think of life as so important to be remembered in this world, having a highway named after us or having whatever named after us. And the fact is, when we're gone, it's not going to be much longer for most people forget about us. Even own family members forget about us. It's just ridiculous. Of course, false teachings arose as the sinfulness of mankind started teaching his own ways, like Cain tried to do in his offering. It says there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privilege shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. Peter tells us in 2 Peter 2:1. So, in the past, there were false prophets among the people. Today, there's false prophets who are teaching damnable heresies. Any religion that does not believe the Bible, does not base a relationship with the Lord upon what the Scriptures teach, is a cult. And they teach damnable heresies and are leading people to hell. It doesn't matter how sincere they are, doesn't matter how nice they seem to be or how evil they seem to be. It makes no difference whatsoever. That's not the basis of our relationship with the Lord. The basis of our relationship with the Lord is the Word of God. And to veer from that is teaching damnable heresies. Hedonism, as in days before the flood, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. Hedonism is basically a very selfish, self-centered lifestyle, and we see that today. You can even look up, somebody told me something about resorts, I think it was, resorts, hedonistic resorts, where you can go and basically anything and everything is allowed, no matter what your fantasy is or whatever, it's allowed there. And it's just a wicked lifestyle, and people applaud that. Widespread violence, man, we live in that world, aren't we? The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And man, we live in a world filled with violence. If God had not promised not to send another flood, I would recommend going into the life preserver business, because I would think we're on the verge of another flood. Now, God's not going to end the world that way, we know that, but judgment is coming. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So, payday someday. We're going to have to pay the price, and the world is quickly heading that way. So full of violence, evil, corruption throughout society. The Bible tells us we're to honor those that are in authority, and there's so many people who don't honor those in authority, and their excuses are, but they're corrupt. Well, yeah, they probably are. Many of them are corrupt. Both sides of the fence, there's corruption. No doubt about that. You can see in the news all the time about politicians that are corrupt. But God didn't say honor those that are not corrupt. He just says honor all those that are in authority. And if we don't get back to that, then we'll fall by the wayside very quickly, as we see our country doing. I would never have thought this 30 years ago, but I could see the end of America. I can see us losing being a country. I can see someone invading us and taking over. I can see that happening. I mean, there are people, I read some multi-millionaire and his family spent $270 million here recently on trying to overthrow the values of this country. And they had alliances with China and other places. And they're willing to do that. I mean, how foolish are they? They want communism, but they got their money, their millions and millions of dollars that they got, and they say communism is good, but communism doesn't make multi-millionaires. It takes away all that. So it's a lie. It's just a way to take control of this world. And what's happening today? It's sad. Preoccupation with illicit sexual activity. Lamech took unto him 2 wives. Name one was Ada, and the name the other Zillah. Polygamy is wrong, always has been wrong, even though David did it, or Solomon did it, or Saul did it, or any other Old Testament person that we could find had multiple wives, and we could find many of them who did. Doesn't make it right. When God says the 2 shall become one flesh, it doesn't say 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. Polygamy's always been wrong, still wrong today, and yet people think it's okay because it's all about selfish desires. And then, of course, we've talked about in Genesis 6:2 that the saved saw the unsaved, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So, again, what they chose, not what God wanted, not what God chose for them, but what they saw is what they liked, and then they chose that. Why is the divorce rate so high in this country? Because people are choosing what they want, all based upon a look of some kind, and then when that look goes away, or somebody else comes along, that's what they go after. So that relationship is not based upon the Lord, it's not based on what God wants, it's based upon what they want. They choose. I saw somebody talking about all the different types of relationships, and he says you can't, you don't get to pick whom you love. Well, that's the biggest baloney I've ever heard of. Of course you do. Everybody gets to pick who they love. I mean, do you want to love God? You love God. If you don't want to love God, you don't have to love God. You want to love that woman? Yeah. That woman? Yeah. That woman? Yeah. And you're forced to do that? No. It's your choice. If you can only pick those that you love, nobody'd ever get divorced. Because they say they love them, and then it goes away. And then they say they love them, and it goes away. So it's not that they love them, they just love what they can get right here and now. And that's the world, again, what we're living in today. We're not talking about the world today, we're talking about the world prior to the flood. But look at the comparisons that we have, at the wickedness that's going on in the world. We're exactly like the days prior to the flood. We're doing the exact same things that they're doing, and we think life is just going to go on. Widespread words and thoughts of blasphemy. Jude talks about Enoch, a preacher of righteousness back before the flood. And that's what he talked about, their blasphemy, how they turned on God. And today how people use God's name in vain. Very quickly, very easily, with no thoughts whatsoever about it. Abnormal depravity. Man, we live in a wicked world today. Pedophiles and politicians who side with the pedophiles, thinking that some of these laws we should not have because pedophiles can't help themselves, and therefore we shouldn't punish them because they abuse a little child. And there are politicians who propose changing laws over that. Oh man, we're in a sad state. It's a wonder God just doesn't zap the whole world right now and start all over with a new creation altogether. If he hadn't said he's going to do it the way that he did, I would say we need to be extremely careful, because the end is going to be now for all of us. Next week we'll talk a little bit more about this, but how could men live so long at that time, about the world that man lived in. Because like I said, we know that they lived over 900 years. Maybe some lived longer than that, could have lived over 1,000 years, we don't know. All we know is what's mentioned in the Bible. But we'll talk more about these things next time.